Hi, today we're going to talk about photograms. You're going to be making your own photogram in class using the enlargers that we've learned a little bit about so far. As you can tell here, this is an example of a photogram. A photogram uses everyday objects. In this photograph, or photogram rather, they use lemon slices. Lemon slices are a great object to use for photograms because they have some opaque areas and then some areas that show a bit of transparency. Here's another example of a photogram. They used objects that have a little bit more three-dimensionality to them, like these scissors. You can see the very white parts of the scissors, the parts that are flat on the paper, and then you can see more grays where they're raised up above the paper. A photogram is made up of everyday objects that are laid right down directly onto the photo paper and then exposed to light for a certain amount of time. It's the same concept as enlarging a photograph in that when you enlarge a photograph, you actually shine light through a negative to expose the photo paper, but with a photogram, you just lay objects down, everyday objects, that you then shine the light on. So some light shines through, some light shines around objects, like these nails, you can see where it kind of shined around to this gray. The opaque parts of the objects that don't let any light through or around are going to show up white on your photogram. Here's an example of something that is transparent, but when it's layered, less light can get through. And so it ends up with a really interesting design. You are going to be making a photogram. So you are going to be responsible for bringing in the materials that you will use to create this photogram. It's really important, sort of like with our sun prints, that you think about objects that have interesting outlines. Think of them as shadows. So if I were to just take a rock and set it on here, or a solid piece of something, it would literally just look like a regular white circle. It wouldn't have any variations to it. When you choose objects like these keys that have really interesting outlines, or some of these other keys that have more of a three-dimensional shape, you get a more interesting photogram. So think about things that are semi three-dimensional, but also have some transparency to them. That's going to create the most interesting photogram. This photogram of bubble wrap seems very simple, but it causes us to stop and pause and look at it because there are a lot of interesting things happening with it, especially where they overlap and the outlines of the circles, the bubbles. Feathers make great photograms. Some feathers are more transparent than others, but a lot of them have very delicate, fine lines to them. So, your job for a photogram, what you need to do. The first thing you need to do is choose your objects. Glasses of water can be really interesting, bottles, things like that. Anything that you can think of that has some transparency to it. People have sometimes used beads. Like I said before, think of things that have some transparency and things that have very interesting outlines to them. That's what's going to create the most interesting photogram. The next thing you're going to do is go into the darkroom. I will give you, all the lights will be off except for the red lights. I will be giving you a piece of photo paper that you will lay down on the base of your enlarger. And then with only the red lights on, you will place your objects on top of that photo paper. Once you have everything arranged, you're going to expose your objects to light. Now, this is where it gets kind of tricky because it really depends on how bright your light is and how transparent your objects are as to whether it would be an appropriate, what would be an appropriate amount of time. Usually about 1 or 2 seconds is enough. Start with that. Start with 1 or 2 seconds. Do an exposure using the enlargers. Once you get through the developer stop, bath, and fixer, look at your photogram out in daylight. Does it seem like it's the right exposure? Are the parts that you want to be light, light, and the parts that you want to be black, like the background, a rich, deep black? Then you know you have the right exposure. Processing the paper, we've gone through. It's another video that I wanted you to look at. So you'll process through all the steps. And then if you want to, so if you create a negative, the ones I showed you before with all the black background are considered negatives. If you create a negative that you're really happy with, you can, of course, create a positive. The positive is sort of like doing another photogram. You basically just lay your negative after it has dried completely face down on top of new photo paper and expose that again under the light of the enlarger. And then once you process that, you will end up with a positive because the light has shined through your negative, and the parts that are black on your negative, the light has a hard time getting through. And so they end up being white, like this whole background, on your positive, and vice versa. So your job is going to be, between now and the next time we meet for class, you need to collect objects that you think will be good for photograms. You can choose objects from nature. For example, anything that we used for our sun prints will work really well for photograms. Also, you can just choose interesting objects that you have at home. I would veer away from anything that doesn't make an interesting shadow. Just keep that in mind. And the more creative, the better, for sure. So good luck. I look forward to seeing what you come up with.